is really about information and it's about preparation. All right, so we can't go finger pointing, and this is not about venting. So if you feel like venting, go outside in the hallway, close the doors, yell a little bit, then come on back in and get informed a little bit more, okay? I want to introduce a few people we have here. As I mentioned, PG&E, Dylan George. Where's Dylan? Right here. Dylan, thank you. We have Battalion Chief David Marquez, right here. Thank you, Battalion. Is Fire Marshal here? No, okay. Right, standing right next to it, we've got Supervisor Bob Elliott right here. And by the way, I'm also County Supervisor Tom Patty, for those of you that may or may not know me. Thank you. And then let's see, who else we have? In the very back, we have from our Office of Emergency Services, Michelle Lima. She's in the back, and she has a lot of handouts, guys, so you will really appreciate that she's here. We do have a lot of handouts over there, so when we're all done, go back, visit the table, and take away some takeaways of a lot of information we've already talked about tonight. We also have, let's see. Okay, we have a field rep from the Assembly Heath Flores office, Russell Fowler, right here. And I gotta tell you, when Heath Flores was one of those, we had a meeting several weeks ago now, and as elected officials, you go to these meetings, and we have a meeting, we've got police chiefs there, we've got fire chiefs there, we've got Office of Emergency Services, we've got PG&E field rep, some of the executives, all talking about these potential blackouts that are going to be coming through this region, possibly, and intermittently, we don't know when or how. So we get this information, and I realized right then and there, it's like, we have to do town hall meetings and get this information out as much as possible. Some people might read the newspaper, not a lot of people get the newspaper all the time. Some of this information is on social media, not everybody's on social media. So myself and Supervisor Bob Elliott, we wanted to come to our district and get this information out to engage, and this is definitely going to be informative, and there's going to be questions, and there's going to be a follow-up from us to you. That I'm doing about 8 of these meetings, 6 or 8 of these meetings, and all the questions that are being asked and all the answers we're going to be posting up and sharing with everybody that signs up and gives us your contact information. We're going to have a follow-up with you and for you, okay? So this is going to be interactive. Your questions are going to be important once the presentations are done. So with that, I think we're all good with our introductions, and I think we're going to jump right in to have PG&E here. And again, let's welcome Dylan George. Thank you, Dylan.
Supervisor Patty. As you mentioned, my name is Dylan George. I'm local public affairs representative for PG&E. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to go through a presentation that talks about PG&E's Community Wildfire Safety Program, share some information with you on what might be happening and why, and then some tips on preparedness. And then after me, we're going to have a variety of other folks speak, and then at the end, we'll be happy to take some questions. So I'll go right into my presentation. PG&E's Community Wildfire Safety Program has 3 pillars to it, as you see on the screen. The first is real-time monitoring and intelligence. What this consists of is we've set up a wildfire safety operations center at our corporate office that is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the fire season. At this command center, a bunch of data from the field is fed in and analyzed, and wildfire threats out in the field are monitored constantly. We have an ever-expanding network of weather stations and high-definition cameras out in the field to gather more and more information. So all of this information comes into this command center, and then that's where things are analyzed and decisions are made on things such as if there's a need to shut off power proactively for public safety. So the second pillar is new and enhanced safety measures, and this comes in several forms. Most of these are going to happen in the highest fire threat areas of our state, and I'll have a map later on in the presentation that explains that. The first of which being enhanced vegetation management. This is tree trimming, tree removal near our lines in the areas of the state that are the highest wildfire threat areas. These tend to be areas that have a lot of trees, are heavily forested. So we have, over the last several years, have been doing more and more to trim some of this vegetation, try to keep it away from our lines. So we're stepping up those efforts again this year. Also, accelerating safety inspections. We have by now inspected all of our overhead power line facilities in these high wildfire threat areas and all of the devices on all of these events. We do regular inspections annually in most cases, but this year we've taken that up a notch, and we've actually deployed a lot of new technology with drones, sometimes helicopters, to get out and get a look at each of these devices on all of our facilities. And in the cases where we found things that are outdated or in need of replacement, we've done the replacement work. We have done almost all of it by this point. Whenever we see something that needs a replacement, it gets categorized as whether it needs to be done immediately or whether it can be scheduled work. But everything will be done before we get into the real heart of the fire season. And then, of course, the majority of my presentation is going to focus on the potential of proactively turning off power for public safety. We call that the Public Safety Power Shutoff Program. So the third pillar of our community wildfire safety program is system hardening and resiliency. So PG&E has 7,100 miles of overhead power lines in the high fire threat areas of our state. So over the next 10 years, all 7,100 miles of those lines are going to get some kind of prescription for system hardening. In a lot of cases, that's going to mean replacing wooden poles with steel or composite material poles. It's going to mean replacing the overhead wire with a thicker coated wire that we call tree wire, something that hopefully will have a better chance of withstanding if a tree branch were to fall into it, if some kind of wind-driven event were to send some kind of obstruction into the line, as will happen a lot of times in the more remote areas of the state. In some cases, it will include undergrounding where that makes sense. And there will be a lot of areas in the rural parts of the state that are the most fire prone where undergrounding would be virtually impossible without dynamiting through a hillside or something like that. But in areas where undergrounding makes sense, that's something that we will look into as well. So this is a lot of this is going to be long-term work that happens over the next several years. But there is a lot of this work happening right now in earnest. A lot of replacement jobs are being done, and we're doing a lot to, I'll talk a little bit about this when we talk about restoration, but to sectionalize our lines and to keep these things as small as possible. So I mentioned Wildfire Safety Operations Center. You see a picture of that on your screen there. It kind of looks like a Starship Enterprise with all of these different computers and all this different information that comes into it. Our goal is to have 1,300 weather stations installed by 2020. We have already dozens of them throughout our territory and are adding dozens more right now as we speak throughout this year. These are shared publicly. You can see the website up there. It's through the University of Utah, sos.utah.edu. We share this data publicly, and we also utilize a lot of other data that's shared publicly from weather stations that are owned by other folks. So all of this, PG&E has its own internal meteorology department, so they do a lot of this forecasting work through the tools that we have out there in the field. But a lot of it, we also use cooperating agencies to get their information as well. High definition cameras, we plan to have about 600 of them by 2022. PG&E is partnered with a program out of the University of Nevada, Reno called alertwildfire.org. For those of you that are interested in this kind of stuff, I would recommend that you take a look at that website, alertwildfire.org. It's pretty neat. You can see these cameras in real time. You can see them right now. They're mostly positioned throughout the rural parts of our state in strategic locations on mountaintops and ridges and stuff like that, where they can get a wide view. We are working with the University of Nevada, Reno. There's a number of community partners who have gotten involved in this program, and we've added a lot of these weather stations throughout this year. We plan to continue to do so throughout the coming years. We've partnered in a lot of cases with communications companies that have property that would be strategic for a camera to be placed, and a lot of property owners and nonprofit types have offered up their facilities to be used. So again, I would encourage you to check that out if you're interested in that. So public safety power shutoff, again, as I mentioned, that's what I'll spend the most of my presentation talking about. So last year, for the first time, PG&E instituted this public safety power shutoff program where we would consider turning off power proactively due to high fire threat danger when that were to become necessary. Last year we had one event. It was in October 8th, I believe, and the power was shut off to portions of the North Bay area and also portions over here. The closest it got to this area was portions of Calaveras and Amador County and El Dorado were affected. High wildfire threat areas in those areas. So this year, the program has been expanded. Last year, we only considered shutting off distribution level power lines. Those are the power lines that bring power to your neighborhood at lower voltages. Transmission lines tend to be the bigger, longer lines that can span dozens or even hundreds of miles of time and move a lot of power at very high voltage. So this year, we have if it's necessary in a particular event, we will shut off transmission, and that's why the expansion of the program means that areas that are even outside of the high fire threat areas of the state could be affected. So these are some of the conditions that would lead to the need to consider a public safety power shutoff event. You can see a red flag warning by the National Weather Service. The National Weather Service is constantly producing 7-day forecasts. They will declare red flag conditions for wildfires when certain temperature and wind and that kind of thing criteria are met. So when they declare a red flag warning, that's when we tend to get our emergency apparatus up and running and start evaluating the need to have one of these events. So you can also see some of the other criteria. Low humidity is a big driver in this, and high winds are a big driver in this. That tends to be where you'll see fires that are sparked by utility equipment, is when you have very windy conditions, sustained winds above 25 miles an hour and gusts above 45 to go with that low humidity. And then fuel conditions on the ground are also a big driver. So, we had a very wet winter this year, so we have a lot of fuel out there that as we go further and further into the summer, and maybe even into the fall, is going to continue to dry out. And if we have a situation like last year where we don't get our first major rain event until late November, last year was the day before Thanksgiving, so very unusually late weather pattern. If we have another situation like that, that's where you might see some of these factors come into play. These are things that are more likely to happen as we get later into the fire season. We don't tend to get a lot of high winds in this area in the middle of summer, even though I know it's windy outside today. But that's not a typical weather pattern around here. Those tend to happen as we get more toward the fall, and then the humidity really drops too in the fall months. And fuel conditions, of course, will just continue to dry out until we do get that first rain. So all of that adds up to our state being in a lot of fire danger as we get really late into the summer and then into the fall months. So this is, I talked a little bit at the beginning about high fire threat areas. So this is an illustration of what I'm talking about. So the California Public Utilities Commission, in conjunction with CAL FIRE, has mapped the entire state based on wildfire danger. The white portion is Tier 1, that's the low fire threat danger. All of the Central Valley is a Tier 1 area, which is good. That's the best place to be as far as the lowest wildfire danger in the state. When you get into the yellow portions, those are Tier 2, it's considered elevated fire risk. These are areas like, to give some local examples, areas like Sonora, Angels Camp, tend to be like lower land, foothill kind of communities. So above the Central Valley, but not quite into the high country of the Sierras. And then you get into extreme, which is Tier 3, and those are the red parts of the map. And those are, to give some local examples, those are areas like Miwok Village, Twain Harte in Tuolumne County, Arnold, Pioneer, Pine Grove. They're areas that are heavily wooded, have a lot of fuel loading, in a lot of cases have not had a lot of forest management activity over the years, have not had a lot of fire over the years, so there's a lot of fuel density built up in places like that. So those are considered the extreme fire danger. So the question is, why do we in Tier 1 need to be worried about this? And the reason for that is because of the interconnected nature of the grid. So we have transmission lines that feed communities in Tier 1 areas, such as Manteca, that are also linked to areas of the state that are much high fire danger areas. So this map, this is not meant to be a map, this is simply an illustration of just how kind of the power grid works as a thumbnail sketch. So we go from generation sources to transmission, which, as I said, moves the power in very high voltage over a very long distance, feeds into a substation, which would then step that power down into a much lower voltage, and sends it out over a distribution network that would feed your homes, your businesses, at a low voltage that's safe to go through a neighborhood. So in an event where we would need to turn off the power, this is walking through some of the notification process. Our goal is to give our customers 48 hours of notice. Sometimes we're not quite able to meet that because sometimes these weather events come on us very fast. They're somewhat predictable. I mentioned the 7-day forecast from the National Weather Service, but sometimes things change within that forecast and you get the weather event coming on you a little faster than you thought. In all cases, we've been able to give our customers, I think, at least 36 hours of notice. So the goal is to give them that 48 hours and then another notice at the 24-hour mark before the event is to happen, to tell them that yes, it still looks like the power shutoff event may be happening in your area, and then to notify them just before the power is turned off. So a lot of times what we will do when we start that 48-hour notice, A lot of times the universe of folks that we notify at that point will be bigger than the universe of folks that actually are affected by the event. As the weather becomes clearer and clearer as we get closer to the event itself, sometimes we're able to shrink down the area that is affected by an outage like this. Our goal is always to keep these things as small as possible and to affect as few customers as possible. So talking about notifications, wherever I go, I always want to make a big point to encourage our customers to update their contact information with PG&E. We have this plan to notify everybody, but our ability to contact you is only as good as the information that we have from you. So if we have an old phone number that's not hooked up anymore, that's not going to do us much good when we try to call you. So we encourage our customers to go on their My Energy account, if that's how you pay your bill. With just a simple click, you can update your contact information. If you're willing to share cell phone numbers, that's a good way for us to contact you. We can use automated text message alerts, automated phone calls, we'll use emails. We'll use any means that you will share with us as a way of contacting you. But again, we're only able to contact you if we have that number for you. So I would encourage you to go, if you don't pay your bill through the My Energy website, you could go on the pge.com website and update your contact information in that way. And then I'm going to share at the end of the presentation a couple of phone numbers and email addresses that you could also utilize to do that. But I encourage you, next time you pay your bill, take a look, make sure we have the best information for you. So back to the notification process. Again, the goal is to notify at 48, 24, and then just before power is turned off. Then at that point, once the power is off, we want to be able to keep customers updated on the progress. Usually what that will mean is when the weather event is passed, we can notify them of that and notify them that we're out in the field making the repairs, patrolling, doing everything we can to get the power back on as soon as possible. And then we are going to send out notifications once the power has been restored. So in cases where our customers have decided to leave their house and stay with a relative, a family member, a friend, we want to be able to notify them that the power is back on so that they can then make their plans accordingly. So this is a breakdown of what happens to get the power back on after it's been turned off. So the first step is the weather all clear. So when we get that go ahead, basically the weather all clear, that the winds have died down, the humidity has risen back up to normal levels, at that point we can begin to start turning power back on. In order to do that, we're going to have to go out and do a lot of inspecting of our lines. So the grid has a lot of things, devices and such on there that are designed to sense when something goes wrong on the grid. And they're designed for safety reasons to stop the flow of electricity when it senses a fault. When we shut down major chunks of the grid, we take away all those eyes and ears of the grid. So in order to be able to restore power, we actually need to go out and lay eyes on all of the facilities that we had to shut down. So what we are going to do is, while the lights are off, we will have crews staged out in the field ready to start doing those inspections once they get the weather all clear. So once that weather all clear comes, they're going to start patrolling the lines, inspecting, making sure there's no damage. In cases where there is damage, obviously that has to be repaired before we get things back up and running. So we will have materials also staged nearby so that we don't have to go too far if we need a replacement pole or a replacement transformer, or cross arm, any kind of devices that we would need to replace. We also go through a process that we call step restoration. So we don't have to wait until the whole system is inspected to get people back on. We can start patrolling and inspecting and clearing lines one by one. And then as each line gets cleared, we're able to re-energize that line, and all of the customers off of that line will have their power back on while we continue to patrol and inspect the rest of the lines down the line. So the good news for tier 1 kind of communities is that the way the grid works is transmission has to be restored before distribution level power can be restored. So the first priority in an event like this is going to be inspecting, repairing, getting the transmission lines back up and running, and then from there we'll cascade down into the distribution network. I also mentioned that at the beginning we're doing a lot, adding a lot of devices to our grid that will sectionalize things. So what that means basically is if you put a device halfway down a span of distribution, you can lock that device out, and then once you've inspected everything below it, you can energize that while you keep inspecting above it. So it's basically something to keep things as small as possible, affect as few customers as possible in an event like this, and then be able to bring them back on through the step restoration process as quickly as possible. So I mentioned damage in the events that we've had so far. We have found a good bit of damage out there, so that obviously has to be repaired. Things have to be replaced and all of that before things can come up. So that's going to be another driver in the length of time that it takes for us to get power back on. And then we'll be restoring power throughout the event, and of course notifying customers once that power is back on. So this is all the things that PG&E is doing to work with our customers to educate them about this program. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you guys about it. We're taking every opportunity we can to talk to the community. I won't go through all of these, but we have sent letters to all of our electric customers. I'm sure all of you have received them in the mail if you are a PG&E electric customer. We're also sending postcards to folks who we don't have contact information on file for. Again, back to my emphasis on making sure we have your most current contact information. We've sent out postcards to encourage folks to go on and update that. We are working with the Public Utilities Commission and the other two investor-owned utilities in our state, which is San Diego Gas and Electric and Southern California Edison, on a marketing campaign. There's a website that Mr. Anderson wrote up over here, prepareforpowerdown.com, prepareforpowerdown.com. That's the partnership between the three utilities and the Public Utilities Commission. It has some good information on emergency preparedness, checklist items, things like that. Ms. Lima from County OES has some good information in the back that I would encourage you to take advantage of. I also have some handouts with some checklists about emergency preparedness and the like. I also want to call out especially this medical baseline. So PG&E has a program called Medical Baseline where customers that have life safety needs that require electricity, such as oxygen machines, CPAP machines for sleep apnea, things like this that require electricity, can get a discount on their bill if their doctor signs off on the fact that they have this medical need. What that gives us is a good list of our medically vulnerable customers so that we can do extra outreach to them right now in terms of planning, but also during an event. So we, in the events that we have had so far, we will actually make live calls to all of our medical baseline customers, and the ones that we don't reach through these live calls, we'll go out and knock on doors for all of them. So in the events that we've had so far, we've reached well over 90% of our medically vulnerable customers through either a live phone call or somebody going out and making contact with them by knocking on their door. This is also information that we share with our emergency partners, such as the County OES, local city and county fire, in order to help these folks have a plan and help them have a place to go if that's what they need to do, or to make sure they have enough backup for their devices. So these are a few things. I mentioned we have some handouts in the back that talk about preparedness. I think the key here is everybody needs to have a plan that works for them and their house and their family. Everybody's plan is probably going to look a little different depending on the situation that you have. But some of these basics on here, emergency supply kits are key. You know, make sure you have backup batteries. Make sure your batteries are good. A lot of times you packed away batteries years ago and they might not be any good anymore, so it's good to test those things on a regular basis. Flashlights obviously are a key. Backup power sources for your cellular phones and that kind of thing where you can charge. Medical needs are big. If you have medicine that needs to be refrigerated, make sure you have a plan for that. Make sure you know how to open your garage door if you have an electric garage door. My favorite suggestion, the most low-tech way to do this is, if you know this is coming, maybe move your car out onto the driveway. So then you don't have to worry about opening your garage door without the power. But make sure you have a plan for that. Consider plans where you can stay with relatives or friends if necessary. You know, all of these are I would recommend that you take advantage of some of the resources, ready.gov. Ms. Lima will talk about the website that the county's launching soon. Prepare for Power Down. Also, here's some more PG&E information. I mentioned if you're not one that likes to use the internet too much, a good way to update your contact information would be to call this number. That number is dedicated specifically for wildfire safety inquiries. It's 1-866-743-6589. Once again, that's 1-866-743-6589. We have a dedicated email address, which is wildfiresafety@pge.org, and then a dedicated page on our website, pge.com/wildfiresafety. There's more tips on there, more checklist kind of things to help you and your family build out your emergency kit. So I would just recommend that you take advantage of as many of these resources as possible and just do your best to have a plan. You know, it's good to have a plan, certainly for the public safety power shutoff possibility, but you know, there's a lot of ways that power could go out there. I think we've seen a lot of it over the last few weeks. We had a couple of earthquakes a couple weeks ago, so I think that really brought emergency preparedness to the top of a lot of folks' mind. There was a massive power outage in New York City over the weekend, affecting 42,000 customers because of a couple of equipment issues. So there's a lot of reasons out there that power might go out. It might be something as simple as somebody in your neighborhood runs into a power pole. So it's always good to have a plan, an emergency plan for anything that may come, and I would just recommend that you work on that and work with your family on that as much as you can. So that concludes my presentation. I'll hand it over to some of our colleagues and then happy to take some questions at the end.
Thank you, Dylan, for that very informative presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Bob Elliott, County Supervisor for District 5, the other half of Manteca. And of course, Supervisor Patty represents half as well. So as he informed you earlier, the purpose of this evening's presentations are to provide information, particularly the information that about what safety measures PG&E may take to prevent additional catastrophic wildfires from occurring again this summer. So we all want to be prepared, and the first step in being prepared for these things is to be informed. So I certainly appreciate everyone coming out tonight to get as much information as possible. Please share that information with your friends, family, and colleagues so that we can get that word out. And please take advantage of the opportunity to pick up any of these handouts that will be provided later on as well. So next in order is our Battalion Chief, Dave Marquez, who will give you a presentation from the fire protection perspective.
Thank you, Supervisor Elliott and Supervisor Patty, for inviting us out this evening, and thank you everyone for coming out. We've been doing a couple of these now, and a little bit of things I want to clear up first, that maybe there's some misconceptions out there. A lot of people are under the impression that Manteca is like the focal point or center of all of this, and it's not. We are no more or less likely to have this happen than any other city that PG&E provides power to. So essentially, a few months ago, the fire department was doing some training on electrical emergencies, and this topic came up. And so we kind of asked more questions, and it snowballed from there. And so the reason you might think that Manteca is at the center of this is just because we kind of stumbled upon it and kept looking into it, and now we're at today. So as Supervisor Elliott said, my name is David Marks. I'm a battalion chief here, and I also act as the city's emergency response coordinator. We have a committee comprised of people from every department in the city. Lieutenant Carmona is here from the police department, but we have people from public works, IT, human resources, you name it. And we meet several times a year to prepare for things like this. We do live drills a couple of times a year that involve every employee in the city. And right now, what I'm going to do is go over some special considerations we're making for extended power outages. We have a comprehensive emergency operations plan already in place. And we worked with County OES several years ago to update that. So essentially, PG&E informed all of the cities that they provide power to be ready to go without power for 2 to 5 days. We hope that we'll get notice that that's going to happen. They're going to try to give us 48 hours of notice. My experience with this is we may get no notice. So it's not trying to dig on them, but if there's a fire and something happens, it could just happen just like that. So you have to be prepared to have no notice. Essentially, what you need to take home from this is that you need to be prepared on your own. The city can only provide so much assistance. Every single individual household needs to be prepared to go 5 days on their own. Now, whether you work as a group in a block or a neighborhood to look after each other, which I suggest, that's kind of the basis of what I'm going to tell you tonight. So we cannot provide bottled drinking water, we cannot provide food for any citizens. You will have working facilities such as drinking water from the taps, you will have working plumbing, but we're going to ask that you reduce your usage of non-essential water like watering your lawns, washing cars, doing laundry, things like that. I'll get a little bit more into that further on. So traffic lights won't be working, street lights won't be working, The railroads have informed us that their crossing guards have 6 hours of battery backup, at which point they've said that they will put generators at each rail crossing. I don't count on that happening. Can't say it will or won't. So you have to be very careful. And unfortunately, the city doesn't have enough staffing to put someone at every intersection or every rail crossing. So cross with caution. All schools will be closed. Most businesses will be closed immediately. Some businesses will stay open for a short time. None of the ones we contacted can stay open for 5 days without power. Those that do have generators for backup power, those are almost exclusively to keep their food storage sellable over a long term. It's not to keep their doors open for business. So one thing that we can guarantee is that the call volume on 911 services is going to increase police and fire. So you can expect longer response times from both of those. Water and sewer services will be functional, but at a reduced rate. All of our wells in the city have generator backup, so as long as we can continue to get diesel fuel to them, we will continue to have limited water supplies. And yes, we do have enough water under those conditions to fight structure fires. However, if we have fires like we had just last week with the 4 homes going up at once, that would effectively use all the water in the city. So we're hoping that it's not all going to happen at once. Extended power outages can affect cell phones in the sense that cell phone towers run on electricity, but they all have battery or generator backup. So as long as they can continue to get fuel or be recharged, they will last. If the cell phone towers go down, then your cell phones obviously won't work. One thing I recommend is if you aren't going to be buying a generator for your home, and I can answer questions on that later on, but if you're not going to be doing that, you can buy small battery backups for about $100 or less, or maybe even more, that will power a cell phone or a laptop for up to a week. And you just plug it in today, charge it up, and then it will sit there until you need it. So citizens with critical medical health issues are going to be directed to our shelter. We'll talk about our shelter here in a minute. Gas stations will be non-functional, so I recommend you keep your gas tanks full. So we do have a dedicated emergency operations center. Unfortunately, it does not have generator backup. And so if this were to happen, we would move that emergency operations center to a backup center, which is located at one of the fire stations. You can expect that essential services will continue. Fire, police, public works, all those things will continue to work in the city. And the Manteca Senior Center is our designated shelter site. It is a Red Cross shelter site as well. And unfortunately, it does not have generator backup. So we can shelter people there, but we can't cool them there. We do not have a facility in the city that can cool people at this point. It is our #1 priority. We are actively putting in the ability, the infrastructure to hook up a generator to the senior center and provide air conditioning. And there are some other sites that we're looking at doing that as well. The school district, we've been working with them. They've offered up the use of gymnasiums, but they do not have generator backups either. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Okay, so the city's going to be using a 3-tiered response plan, and it's going to really depend on how big we scope our operations up to how big and widespread and long-lasting this problem is. Public safety and sanitary are going to be our #1 priorities, and staff are assessing the need for private generators, or we're making contracts right now with getting generators and diesel fuel delivered to us as a priority in this situation. But I can also tell you that every other city is doing the same thing. So depending on how big the area is affected, that will affect whether or not we get our diesel fuel. So when notified of an impending public power shutoff, the city will notify its citizens on social media, would be Facebook, our website, also on Nixle, which is an application you can download and get information on things like this. We'll also be sending people out through neighborhoods just to inform citizens. And I'm currently working in the early stage of working with citizen action groups, neighborhood watch organizations that will also be able to get that information out. We will immediately open the senior center as a shelter site. We will have portable generators there to power medical devices that need electricity. They won't be for non-essential life-saving things at that point, but they will be there to work, oxygen machines or CPAP machines, things like that. And at that point, when this first happens, most city functions will continue to work. Tier 2, so after 12 hours, possibly sooner, of a power outage, we activate our emergency operations center. All essential city personnel will be called back to work. So every policeman, every firefighter is going to come back to work and be mandatory to stay on duty until the incident's over, or we can start cycling people through. We also have the ability, and I'll talk about this later on, to call back all 250 plus employees of the city to help also. As a citizen or as a public servant, you are obligated when you take your oath of office to come back during an emergency. So at 24 hours, this is getting serious. Most of us have never lived through a 24-hour power outage, especially on the West Coast. So we are going to most likely proclaim a local emergency, and that allows us to do a couple other things that are very important. We'll be holding daily press conferences. We'll look at the need for a curfew. We'll be asking for mutual aid from other regions that are unaffected. Of course, that may or may not be possible, depending on how big the affected region is. So I'll touch on what a proclamation of local emergency talks about. There's a lot of things that it allows us to do, but the big ones are it allows us to impose a curfew, and it allows us to mandatory all of our city employees back to work. It also allows us to seek federal or state reimbursement, but that's not up to us whether we're going to get it. We just ask for it. So that's essentially our emergency operations plan. This was for yesterday's meeting, but you can tell we're at the meeting right now. We're currently adjusting this plan on the fly as we go and updating with information. I literally get dozens of emails and calls every day. And if you email me, I'll give you my contact information. I will call you back and we'll have a one-on-one conversation with you and tell you anything I know or can help you with. So that's my contact, that's my email address. I'm also, if you look on the city's website from the fire department, you'll find me there and you can email me there.
Thank you, Chief. Actually, very comforting thought that all the city personnel are required and they're going to come back into work. The Board of Supervisors has a plan of action similar. We're going to be evacuated to Hawaii, and we're going to watch and make sure that happens the way it should happen. So, what you're gathering is you're seeing that your agencies, including PG&E, is being very proactive, and it's what we need to do in the local community. Now, if we were to look at a crystal ball, and a lot of questions that have been asked already is, what's this look like, or where's it going to go, and how can you predict, can we predict how it's going to happen? And there aren't any indicators. There may be blackouts that affect just regions or sections, but if we're looking at 800,000 residents in San Joaquin County, the likelihood of all of San Joaquin County being blacked out, probably not very high. You might be just down the road being able to go get gasoline and get sources of food and water supply, but maybe right here on Main Street it may not be available. So this could be sectional as well as regional. We don't know for sure. We've talked about, and I have some flyers in the back, but this is a local vendor. I just called on a couple days ago and said, put together a flyer. There are local vendors here in your town as well that you can talk to about a Generac system. It needs to be permitted, it needs to be properly installed professionally, and you can look at these systems also at Home Depot. They have portable generators available for your own needs. If you're smart, what you might want to do is invest into a generator right now, and when power goes out, you can sell extension cords to your next door neighbors, and you can get a pretty good rate at the time, all right? So I was actually in the Florida Keys when Hurricane Katrina, in the middle of the night, came down south and then cut across the Keys and went to the Gulf and became a devastating storm. But we lost all power for several days. So in the morning, my uncle and I went out and picked up from the horse barn. We picked up and brought out a generator and plugged it in the refrigerator, and we had essential power to be, to be self-sufficient for those few days while the power was out. So there's generators from all scales and spectrums and budgets, for that matter, from a couple $100 to several $1,000 to give entire house energy. So it's up to you guys what you can do as a plan of preparation. In the very least, if you go to Best Buy or Target or any of the stores around here, they have little lithium batteries that'll give you 5 days of recharging your cell phone so you have open communication. Yesterday we were asked, we have power, we have warnings over here, where can we travel? Well, if we're getting warnings here and they're not getting warnings, you have family in Fresno or in Modesto or Sacramento, call up your family. Go on a little road trip and visit, secure your house, and go visit with some friends. A great idea is to activate who's part of the neighborhood watch. If you're not, you should be. You should get involved and organize a little communication network, because that communication network will work hand in hand directly with the police department and fire, and information can be filtered and you're looking out for each other. Somebody's going to go on the road and take a road trip and go visit family. Well, let your neighbors know so that that house is being looked after. So these are important little steps to take. Gasoline is going to be, I'm sorry, not gasoline, but natural gas is going to flow. So that won't be shut down. But you have matches or you have an electronic lighter to light the stove. So these are little steps and stages you need to take and be prepared for what you might need to take care of yourself. I know we do have, let me see on our list of who else. I know our Office of Emergency Services, Shelley Lima is going to present. And then we also have, let's see, who else do we have on the list? Well, we got Manteca PD here. So, Lieutenant, are you going to present anything, or just here for questions and answers? Okay, so thank you, appreciate it. I wasn't sure if you guys were going to work it. So, on that note, let me bring in our Office of Emergency Services Director, Michelle Lima.
Notes are all on a piece of paper. I didn't prepare it in PowerPoint. I didn't want to kill anybody with my PowerPoint. Thank you again for inviting Office of Emergency Services. I'm the Deputy Director of San Joaquin County Emergency Services. In the back, there are some flyers that are available. Please only take them if you missed something tonight or you need some information. We're trying to reserve them a little bit. I will give you a source where you can get those online if you have computer or internet access. The more of you that are actually prepared for an emergency, the better off our first responders have it, because those fewer people that we have to worry about and we have to take care of. So the reason that I'm here is to encourage you to prepare for yourself, to plan for all hazards. It's not just this PG&E hazard. How many of you felt the earthquake today? Anybody? Some people in Tracy have said that they felt it. So we might not have felt that here, but there are so many other emergencies that we need to be prepared for. And the power can go off with any one of those types of emergencies. So this is a good step, and it's good for us to start to think about these emergencies. At the Office of Emergency Services, we have been working very closely with the 7 cities in the county, as well as our partners, PG&E and other stakeholders, to develop a de-energization plan. It's a strategic plan. High level kind of tells us how we're going to work with everyone and what we will activate, who we will activate, and how we will perform our operations to protect the public. We also have a new emergency operations plan that goes along with that outlines our mutual aid and how we will help our cities. So remember, all of these emergencies, and you probably heard this when you watch the tornadoes and things on TV when FEMA talks, all emergencies are local. So if the power goes out in the city of Manteca will handle that until they can't. And then they'll reach out to the county, and the county will reach out to the state to get more resources. I can tell you that the last outage that Dylan talked about early June, they were able to bring in some supplies and help the communities with a cooling center and charging stations. So depending on how big that outage is going to be, there are those options. So we will have some resources that we can count on to help us, depending on how big the situation is. So some things that you can do right now, think about all of your emergency people that you would reach out to, your physician, family members. Do you have those phone numbers memorized in your head? Probably not. Write those down on a piece of paper somewhere and put them in a safe place. If that's in case your cell phone isn't working and you have just a regular telephone line and you have to borrow a phone from someone else. Make and share a family communications plan. What if the power goes out suddenly? Maybe it's not this type of a planned event, but the power goes out suddenly. Some of you are working in the Bay Area and others of you are here. How will you communicate with the rest of your family whenever you're in separate places? So think about that communication plan and how you can communicate with everyone and share that with the children that are old enough to have their own phone or to be away from parents when a disaster can strike. Plain old telephone line. How many of you have a telephone that does not have an electric plug-in in your home? There's not very many. They cost about $13 to $15. If you have telephone service, or you could potentially have it, like say AT&T hard line in your home, those lines will still allow you to call 911 in an emergency. They don't turn that off. So that is an option that you could have if your cell phone is not working, if you're not near a voter or receiver that has generation power or that's outside of your area. That could be an option for you. They have some flyers on the counter back there that give you a list of things to pack in your emergency kit. Enough water, gallon a day per person, food, pop top lids, unless you have a can opener. A lot of little things like that. Think about everything that you use. Take today to consider everything that you use that relies on electricity. And if you sit down and look at all of those things, you're going to start to see that you rely on a lot of things that are electric to make your life easier. But can you get by without them? My husband is insulin dependent, so his insulin has to be refrigerated. So I need some source of cold storage for his insulin. Therefore, I wanted to get a battery backup for one of those little mini portable refrigerators like you stick in the center console of your truck. So that's what I got for his medication. So just little things like that. It doesn't cost a lot, but you're thinking ahead of things that you need. Those battery packs, they also have the little, you've probably seen the little ones. I know a lot of teenagers have them for their cell phones because they run the batteries down before the end of the school day, so they plug in the battery backup to get them through the rest of the day. Get a couple of those to keep your battery on your phone charged. Some of them are also good enough to charge a tablet. Again, check with your physician if you're relying on any kind of medical equipment, durable equipment that have a battery. For example, these wheelchairs have battery packs, so you may have to find an alternate source to recharge that battery or a secondary battery that you can plug into it to keep it going. We also have a flyer for those that are dependent on these type of pieces of equipment. Maybe you might have an old-fashioned wheelchair stuck in the corner of your home just for those types of emergencies. Check with your pharmacist for information about your refrigerated medications, any other ideas that they might have. Understand that Dylan said that the power, they might advise us 48 to 24 hours in advance. The power's going to be out. So with that time, use that to prepare and get things ready. Double check your emergency kit. Make sure your batteries are all there. Make sure you have a good supply of them. Top off the gasoline tank. If you're like me, you can't keep it on full, but you might be able to keep it at least above a half. Top off your propane tank if you plan to use the barbecue grill to help to cook dinner. And one thing that we were told earlier is those little water bottles, use them to fill up the freezer, and then they'll freeze in the freezer, and now it'll help to keep that food a little bit colder for a little bit longer if the power is out. Purchase those LED lights. They're battery operated. They're good for outside spotlights, and don't put the batteries in them until you need them. And now you have the outside security. It just makes some of us feel better knowing that the outside is lit up at nighttime. Talk to your employer and make sure that your employer has provided you instructions if the power is off for a number of days. Will you go to work? Will you stay home? Consider your children. Since you can't send them to school, how will you take care of them? So put together a plan with your employer so that way you're ready. Again, think outside the box. Can you go to another location? Can you take your battery backup things to work and charge them at work, or vice versa, depending on where the power's out? So it might just be at the office where the power's out, and then you can stay home, maybe, unless you're a county employee. Another thing, if you have an emergency radio, those portable battery operated or the hand crank radios, there are 4 stations in the San Joaquin County area that we know for sure broadcast our emergency system alerts, and that's where we will share information to update you. KFBK 1530 out of Sacramento, KCBS 740 out of San Francisco, KSTN 1420 Stockton, and KOSO 92.9 FM out of Modesto. So those are 4 radio stations that we know will broadcast those emergency alerts. And lastly, on the board, for some of you in the back, you're not going to be able to see it, but ready.gov, it's really easy to remember. There is a lot of information. In fact, all of the flyers that I've brought are available at ready.gov for you to download or to look at your leisure. There's some checklists. There's a copy of the communication plan, which I spoke about. There's a lot of other really handy information. It's listed by type of emergency. So if there's other emergencies that you want to think about planning for example, flooding or the heat, anything like that, there's a lot of really good information. And coming before the end of this month, we hope to have live the sjready.org website, which will be through San Joaquin County, and that's where we will share real-time information if something changes or we know that there's going to be a power outage in the next 24 to 48 hours. We'll put it right on that website so you'll know where you can go to get more information. So the last thing I can tell you is please make sure that if you haven't already, that you've updated your contact information on the My Wildfire Alerts page through PG&E, and you'll get the information the same time that I did. And I welcome any questions in the back if you need them.
Thank you, Shelley, for that additional, very informative information. At this time, I'd like to thank the city of Manteca for allowing us to use this transit station to provide this public service this evening. We really appreciate having an opportunity to do that and to have such a beautiful facility to do it in. So thank you, city of Manteca. I'd also like to recognize someone who may not have been completely introduced earlier, but a distinguished member of our panel who will be helping to answer questions, Lieutenant Carmona from Manteca Police Department. Lieutenant Carmona, please come up and join us here. So at this time, we will proceed on to our questions and answers. Supervisor Patty has a microphone here that he will provide to anyone who would like to ask questions. So please address it to whichever of our panel members you would like to have answer your question.
And let's remember, we're not here to vent and we're not sharing frustrations. This is questions, answers, information, okay? Thank you.
We're the representative from PG&E. Historically, what is the fire season and are we in it now?
So yes, we are in it now. So historically, it's interesting what you said because the fire season is kind of ever expanding. Historically, the fire season ends when we get our first rain, our first significant rain. So a lot of times that's late September, October timeframe, but what we've seen lately is a lot of years where we don't get that first rain until much later in the fall months, and that extends the fire season quite a bit further. Last year, like I mentioned before, it was the day before Thanksgiving, so if we're going all the way to late November, that really lengthens the fire season out. We are in it now. We're not in probably the highest threat right now because of the wet winter. Fuel conditions are still not as dry as they will be as we get further on into the summer and then into the fall.
And if I could, this is slightly off topic, but what is PG&E doing to, we're hearing more and more about hacking the grid. What is PG&E doing to prevent situations like
So that's a really good question. So this is something that keeps a lot of PG&E folks up at night, the threat of a cyber hack on the grid. We have a cybersecurity operations center in Concord. If I could show it to you, I would love to because it's a really cool state-of-the-art kind of facility where we have a lot of very smart people there that are working against that. But I heard a stat that there's an attempt at a hack on somewhere in the grid, somewhere in the grid of the United States, like several times a day. So it is something that is I don't mean to scare folks, because like I said, I mean, I feel like PG&E is in a better position than most to be able to defend against something like that. But it is a threat that is out there, and it is something that we're very cognizant of and doing our best to try to mitigate. It's a good question.
Question, yes.
I have a question. All of these presentations were excellent. Are they available somewhere? Can you download those, that we have access to them on the computer? That we could download those presentations for us, would you show here?
So I believe all of
They will
PG&E's
find it on
information
YouTube,
is
on my
available
website. I'll give you the link later. You're out.
The presentation that I gave, if you email me, I will send it to you.
Okay.
I printed off about a dozen copies, I think they all got taken. But I will send an electronic copy to anybody who wants one.
And Chief, maybe we can, because we're gonna do a follow-up email with everybody's contact here, and we're gonna link the phone numbers, information, FAQs, so we maybe can get that information in a link, we can link it in, okay?
That would be great.
And I plan to put it all on sjready.org.
Now that's a great OES director, let me tell you.
Also, to follow up on your fire season questions, some of the biggest fires we've had recently were in December, so there is no fire season anymore.
This is more of an observation and asking other people possibly to contact me as well. It's not so much a question, but that's better.
Speak loud, just speak loud.
Louder?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. That was a heartwarming story about the generator during the hurricane. In Hurricane Irma, 12 people died in one nursing home alone in Fort Lauderdale, in Hollywood. The city of Manteca, which unfortunately is not here, every week keeps adding additional requirements to the permitting for the Generac generators. I've had one sitting on the dock at Home Depot for better part of a month now. The requirements that they're adding have to do with noise and are actually making them more dangerous. Longer gas lines, because now they don't want them in side yards. Most of the side yards in my neighborhood have concrete pads and very few windows. The planning commission meets on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month. I'm planning to go to the next one, and if anybody else is interested in installing a whole house emergency backup generator, I think it would be a good idea, because these are not code or IEC requirements. They're just being generated out of the office, and it's disappointing.
That's a great point. I heard from somebody that about 6 or 7 planned installations were canceled because the fees were being raised up and the challenges were mounting. So I think it's a great idea to talk to the city, especially in light of this type of preparation. We should be given consideration, not penalized, and encouraged to do it. Yeah. By the way, we want to recognize and thank Facebook for being here tonight. We have a live stream for tonight's town hall to reach as many people.
I can speak a little bit to the generator issue. We have had meetings on that, and they have expedited the process of the permitting to, they say they can turn them around in about a day. Now, as to the fees and the regulate, I don't know anything about that, but I would like to clarify what you're talking about is a whole house generator that's permanently installed and can power your whole house. It automatically comes on when the power goes off. That is not the same as the generator you can go buy at the hardware store that you can turn on and run an extension cord just to your refrigerator or just to an air conditioning, portable air conditioner. Those, there are no permits for those, just you have to be safe when you use it. You don't want to put it in your house, you want a well-ventilated area, something like that. So they're two separate things, and there's an immense expense for a whole house generator. I don't know the cost of them, but they're very expensive. And then, the ones at Home Depot can run from $200, $300 up to $4,000. So there's quite a bit of difference.
Obviously, you kind of answered it, but my question is more on the portable generators. Could you just kind of quickly go over what some of the precautions would be? Because I know every year in other areas people die from having a generator in their house, or is the garage okay? Does it need to be outside? Can you just go over that for those?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for bringing that up. That is a question I get a lot. A portable generator, any combustion engine, cannot be run inside an enclosed area like a garage or anywhere in your house. It needs to be in a well-ventilated area, as far from the house as possible. And you're gonna have to run an extension cord into the house. It will quickly produce enough fumes to become lethal for your entire family. So do not run a generator in your garage or in your house. And on top of that, like I said, you don't need a permit for one of these. And the decibel enforcement, there are laws on the books for the amount of noise that these can produce. And in normal times, a lot of those generators would not be acceptable in a residential neighborhood running outside at night. Those laws would be not enforced during an emergency such as this. So.
If I can add something really quickly, OSHA has a little commercial on these generators that he's talking about, and the commercial says, if you're not gonna start your car in the house, don't start a generator. So think of a generator as an automobile, and that will make you much safer about the carbon monoxide and stuff too. And get a battery-powered carbon monoxide detector in your home.
And my question is for people that work, understand we're gonna get notifications if the power goes out here in Manteca, but what about those of us that work in Stockton or Modesto? How are we gonna know if we should even bother to leave for work? How are we gonna know if our employers are gonna have power?
So I can speak to that in general in terms of PG&E's notifications. So we will share very widely with media outlets, through social media, Facebook, Twitter, all of that, the scope of the area that is affected by the outage. So, I mean, obviously, I think you need to work with your employer to find out what their particular plan is. But we should be able to share with you more or less what areas are affected, so you should know what parts of Stockton might be affected or might not be affected in an event like this.
Hi, my name is Don Claus. I work at the Doctor's Hospital in Manteca, and I'm emergency preparedness there. So I just thought I'd mention one thing, it wasn't discussed here, but doctor's offices will be closed. So you need to understand that you won't be able to have your doctor's appointment, you won't have anywhere to go there. You need to have your medications and get to the pharmacy. And I work in the ER, and I can tell you that everybody's gonna come there thinking we're gonna be able to solve all your problems. We will be on limited power and also. So if you have something that you can take care of with a first aid kit, do it. If you need us, we're there. But be prepared for those eventualities. Make sure you have your medications. If you have dialysis, some places have generators, some don't. Make sure you find out where your alternate site is, because we will be crowded, we will be impacted, and we will be on limited. We will have limited abilities just like everybody else in town.
For a generator, what is the minimum wattage you can use a generator for to run a refrigerator, as an example? And the refrigerator I'm talking about is like 3 years old. Because I have a generator I used to use for minor tailgating, but it's a smaller one. I don't know if that's adequate enough to run the refrigerator, during that time.
So I actually do not know the answer to that question. Does anyone in the audience happen to know?
Generac on their website has a calculator.
Generac does have a calculator depending on what you need and your needs are, and it's not volts or watts, it's gonna be amps. So be careful of that, okay? And I bet if you go by Home Depot and ask them, say, okay, if I need just some essentials and a refrigerator, freezer, how many amps do I need for that? And I'm sure they'll let you know.
I do know that a lot of people are buying 2,000 watt generators, but I can't say whether that would work or not.
You got a book when you had your refrigerator manual, it has the wattage requirements. I've looked into it, and most refrigerators, about 500 watts, so 2,000 watt, 3,000 watt portable generator to power a refrigerator at a time. The secret to the refrigerator and freezers is do not open and close the door very much. Don't go in and out of them a lot. That will really extend life. You can, with a little bit of, we got some ice bottles in there. You can go 3-4 days easily, before you have to have the big barbecue.
Fireside grill. Green Gear website has information on what you need for your house sectionally or entirely.
Question to the generators, what about the solar backup generators? Is that an option?
So there's a misconception about what solar can and cannot do. So one, if you have solar on your house and the power goes out, you're gonna be without power. Your solar will not run your house. Also, there are no solar power generators. They don't exist. They have solar powered batteries. Panels that can charge a battery. They take days to charge those batteries sometimes. Like it can take a day to charge a cell phone with a small solar panel. So I wouldn't suggest using solar energy as a backup source other than to charge small electronics. And they do have now, and I'm not an expert on this, they do have large household batteries that attach to your solar system, but I don't know anything about them, and they're tens of thousands of dollars as far as I know. So
The one that I saw, it was a smaller unit that you can plug in, also electric, and it has solar panels that you can put outside and charge it.
So that's a solar battery? It takes a considerable amount of time to charge it, and once it's charged, it has very limited ability.
Okay.
It won't run your refrigerator as far as I know.
Okay.
We charge portable electronics.
Okay.
This is directed to Manteca PD.
I don't know the answer to this one.
I don't know on the presentation saw measures when when the power goes out, a lot of mischief happens. I saw that there was curfews, but is MPD going to do more patrolling? What other measures is MPD?
Correct, that's a good question. Depending on how long the outage is gonna be, kind of like what the chief said with the different tiers. Right now, we run 10-hour shifts. When the power goes out and it's gonna be extended, then we'll bump it up to 12 hours. And we'll bring extra personnel in to patrol the high crime areas that we would think would be like for looting, some of the residential areas, for thefts and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we will increase our patrols, we'll have more people out, and we'll do the best we can. We'll be out in 12-hour shifts, but double the personnel we would have right now.
So I'm not sure who can answer my question, but I understand that the two hospitals will be throttling down to emergencies only, and everybody else is shifting to different hospitals that are functioning locally. But what about rest homes, where we have lots of apartments, and are they going to be planning? But rest homes where there's going to be a lot of people under critical situations, are they being forced to prepare, or are they being addressed to prepare, or are we just hoping that they will?
So if you look at historically where the big life losses in an event like this, it is in large convalescent homes or elderly care facilities, things like that. I'm glad that it's Dawn, right, from the hospital. I've been in contact with doctors and Kaiser, and immediately upon this happening, they're going to start their action plans. They're going to start probably shipping critical patients to other hospitals that are unaffected, shutting down non-essential services, and the ERs will stay open, but who knows, how long they're going to be inundated. Convalescent hospitals and homes are a different story. When Paradise had their fire issue, our facilities here their sister facilities were receiving patients from Paradise coming here. And I know all of the care homes in this city that I'm aware of have agreements with sister facilities outside of the area so that they are affected, they can start sending their people to those facilities. And that would start immediately, like hour one, we'd start preparing for that. The other thing is we have a dialysis center here. Those people can't go for more than a day or two before it becomes lethal, and they do not have generator backups. So they would have to be hand pumping the infusions at that point. And so they also have been been in touch with me to get transportation, and they've secured some of their own transportation also, but to help get those people onto the facilities that are unaffected, because there's a lot of them. So everybody's planning, but none of this has been tested.
Great question. Addition, yeah.
Does the Manteca PD has made some arrangements to perhaps use the National Guard for emergencies that go up to 5 days or possibly longer than that to patrol the streets during the curfew hours?
Well, it's kind of like the chief said, if it got to that point, we would be requesting mutual aid, and that aid would go all the way as high as we needed it. We would probably start calling other departments, other jurisdictions first to come in and help with that kind of stuff. But if it actually became that type of emergency, then those resources would be available to us. Heaven forbid we ever get to that point.
Yeah.
If things escalated to that point, I talked about declaring a local emergency. To request National Guard, we'd have to have a local disaster, and it would have to be proclaimed by us and accepted by the state up to the OES and the governor. And if we're doing that, I can guarantee you we're not the only ones doing it. So it would be at a much larger scale than what we're talking about here.
Is there wisdom to consider maybe like how schools have fire drills for something like this to run a half-day practice of turning things off and just see how we do?
We're not turning your power off for half a day. There might be wisdom in running a drill.
So, city staff, we do this every year. Now, we haven't specifically practiced a 5-day power outage, but this last year we did a 5-hour drill where we, oh, do you remember what it was? It was a chemical spill, but it was all ended up being terrorists and things like that. So we had multiple things going on, and all 250 plus employees were involved in that for multiple hours, including city council, who has to be called in to declare a local emergency and things like that. So we do that once or twice every year. I can guarantee you that our next one's going to be on an extended power outage. So.
I also want to reiterate something that PG&E is in the business of selling electricity. Doing blackouts, they are going to lose a lot of money. So as a public utility and a utility that's traded on the stock exchange, they're not into let's just black out and lose all this money randomly. This is going to be done only when it's necessary, and it's going to be done as selective as possible. So we're talking about worst case scenarios, but it's always better to be prepared for what you need in case of an emergency or in case of something like this being prolonged than an event coming along and you're unprepared for what you should have been prepared for. So the most important thing, first off, is that you're here. You're engaged and you're listening and learning. That's first and foremost. So next step, you're seeing that you've got your local government is engaged in what we need to be doing to help you out if and when and as needed, and you're understanding what your hospitals are going to be doing, what nursing homes. There's a lot of precaution being taken and put into action already while we're idle and for being prepared for the eventuality of what may or may not ever happen. So just you see that there's a high level of active engagement here at all levels, and we really appreciate that. So I want to thank our panel and everybody here. I'm not cutting off questions, but by all means, I want to thank everybody for being here.
Any more for PG&E? I'm sorry, I have to run. I'm presenting to the Tracy City Council tonight, so any last PG&E questions before I run off?
When I looked at the map where we had tier 1, 2, 3, I considered it in blocks. Now I see that tier 1 runs entirely through the state. So it's possible that part of Manteca will be hit and part of it won't, or is that?
That is possible. So there are multiple different transmission sources that feed into Manteca, and they come from all different directions. So it is possible that certain parts of town might be connected to a transmission source that is affected in an event like this, while other parts of town are not. The possibilities here are really kind of endless get into gaming out a lot of scenarios because of just so many transmission lines out there. But it is possible you could have part of the city affected and part of the city unaffected. Yes.
I have a question about hospital area, fire department area. Is there grids that don't get shut off?
Not, if your question is, will we not shut off a grid specifically because it is connected to a hospital or fire department? No, I mean, that's not a luxury we have. We have to shut down what is in the high fire threat area. Hospitals are required to have a certain amount of backup generation for any kind of event where they would lose power. So, we're not allowed to factor that. We're not able to factor something like that into our decision. It's all about where the fire danger is.
Okay, Dylan, that's the last PG&E question. It's a great question and good answer.
Thank you.
Dylan, thank you. Thank you for being here. Dylan, as you're walking out the door, we have one gentleman for a PG&E question.
Yeah. So we hear a lot about electricity going on with various reasons, whether it's the power because of fires or preventive or anything like that. And there's so many different things we can do as far as cutting down trees around the power lines. But taking it at a different level in order to mitigate the load on the system and put more solar with batteries in homes. Is there any new programs coming down the line that would help support something like that could actually take that load and help you guys look at it and say, well, they got solar, they got batteries, we don't have to worry about a big demand from their giant air conditioner or whatever it is.
So solar technology has come a long way and continues to improve. Battery technology still has a long way to go. That's going to be the biggest driver in people being able to actually kind of detach from the grid and power their own house with their solar array. Because right now it's really, the solar unit that you have on a residential roof is not really sufficient to power your house at any given moment. So the key driver in that is really going to be the battery technology. And that's going to allow people to be a little more self-sufficient and even potentially go off the grid if they want to do that.
Speaking with a solar company, this is a great question. Speaking with a solar company, they had told me that one $10,000 battery, that would be in addition, $10,000 to $15,000 battery, in addition to your solar, would not run an entire house. So, and that's just going to be a limited amount of power per $10,000 to $15,000 battery for storage. Question, yes ma'am.
Yes, I already spoke to a company, the Generic. And for my house, 2,300 square feet, they quoted me $15,000 to $19,000 to run the whole, to my house going in the pool and whatever. Now, if I went to Home Depot and bought a generator, could that, I could have somebody who knows how to install it, and I don't have to get a permit? This, I need permits, correct?
So, yes and no. The generator that you can buy at Home Depot just off the floor is not going to power your whole house. It can't even be plugged into your whole house. It can power a few items as big as a refrigerator, depending on the size of that generator, but only through an extension cord. So the generators that you're talking about are designed to power your entire house, and they go on automatically when the power goes off, and they have to require permits and a contractor to put them in,
And that's what they were saying, that there's a big backup to have these installed. So if I called a man tomorrow and said, yes, I do want to get the unit, no matter the cost, it's gonna take a long time to get it installed because the city's backed up on these kind of permits.
I'm not aware of that.
Is that what somebody said?
Yeah, no, I've looked into it. Okay, first off, about a 22 kilowatt would be what you need on a maximum level. Okay, it'd be 16 to 22, let's just say 22 on the high side. That's about a $5,000, maybe $6,000 unit. It is no way going to be a $9,000 install. So,
19.
yeah, so whatever you were quoted, they're not a reputable company, and they're definitely taking advantage. So that's a starting point, that one right there, because you got a 22 kilowatt system for like 7,900, I believe is quote, or thereabout.
The 22 is 9,000, but that's,
Okay.
10,000 cheaper than what they told me.
Exactly, so shop around.
Okay.
You know, you shop around, and that's a starting point that you can give a little baseline of comparisons.
Call the Amish.
But will it take me 2 months to get the city to approve and get it installed? That was my other question.
So my information says no, but I believe there's people who've had experience with it recently, so I can't answer that.
Yeah,
In the
okay.
process, in the process.
So I am in the process. As soon as I first heard about this, I went down and bought a 16,000 watt generator. The city has decided that they cannot be put in side yards. They must be put in the backyard. They must be 5 feet away from any opening to the building. They must be 5 feet away from the fence line. They are now requiring that the panel, your outside panel, and your gas meter have to be a minimum of 3 feet apart. My house is 18 years old. They're only 18 inches apart. The electrical contractor that I've been talking to said he's going to have to move the panel to do it. So all of these things, each individual part has to be permitted. It's time consuming. They should be on a concrete pad, especially a 20,000 kilowatt should definitely be on a concrete, or 20,000 watt should be on a concrete pad. So if you have to put it in your backyard, then you're gonna have to build a concrete pad. You're gonna have to run gas lines. And I wonder about the risk in earthquake country of running long gas lines when you could put it in your side yard, 10 feet from your gas station. So all of these things are what ends up costing. I was under the impression when I started this project that for my $4,200 generator, it would cost me between $2,000 and $4,000 to have it installed. It's actually looking like it's gonna cost me probably around $10,000 for the installation. And I don't think that varies by the size of the generator.
Wow.
Also, the company that Home Depot contracts with, to install their generators, Generac, and I called them a month ago, told me that if I didn't buy the generator from them directly, as opposed to Home Depot, which is who I bought it through so I could get a longer warranty, that they have a 6-month waiting period. Home Depot is now vetting local contractors who they do business with, who they're checking to make sure that they're licensed and bonded. It's a much more complicated thing than it seems like it should be.
Get involved, you can go to your city council meeting and ask about that.
Yeah,
Because you really need to be vocal about, talk to your city manager, talk to your city council members, this is an unnecessary requirement, this isn't a state mandate, these are just, local regulations that are being put in. Just local, right?
They're not even local regulations, they're not part of the city code. Side yard thing is not part of the.
It's just these are new regulations being imposed.
Correct,
Locally.
correct.
Yeah.
By the office itself.
What office?
The planning department.
The planning department.
Told by one of the people who works there.
Okay, did you say there's
Why
gonna
don't
be?
you come see me afterwards? Anyone who's interested in this issue, come see me.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. My husband and I live in South Manteca, in the rural area. And so how well protected would that area be, given that we typically have to call, the sheriff's department rather than the police department for assistance?
We work really well with the sheriff's department, so if that ever became an issue, they would extend out to us for assistance, and we would make sure that we control that if they weren't able to do it. So we would have a lot more officers on, so our reach would be pretty far. We would be able to just make sure the Manteca Police Department is on emergency, or 911 if there's an emergency, will respond if they can't do it, for sure.
District 5 is South County, that's Supervisor Bob Elliott's. If you're in District 3, then in North County, then I have a drone flying over your house and making sure the monitored 24 hours a day. But you're not.
Speaking to that issue, Manteca is sectioned as far as numbers itself for the police department and the non-emergency number?
No, we just have one. If it's non-emergency, it's 456-8101. If it's the emergency, obviously, it's 911.
Any more questions? Last couple questions?
When you say section, did you mean for the numbers to call, or? Because we do have, the fire department does have the city broken up into grids.
So I get my car broken in at the gym. I call 911. I'm told that, you have to call them a non-emergency number. Then they tell me what part of town are you on? And then they say, this number, if you're on this part of the town, you call this number.
No, there's only one number. We're broken up into beats, what officer would go and handle that call. But there's only one phone number for our dispatch center. The police department is broken up into different phone numbers for each department. But to call dispatch for a non-emergency such as a break-in, there's only one number.
You know what that number is?
It's 456, area code 209-456-8108.
I don't know if this is a rabbit trail question or not, but for Supervisor Elliott and Patty, how long could it take Manteca to be switched over to SSJID?
Supervisor Elliott, that's a great question for you.
Well, thank you, Supervisor Patty. Actually, I believe we have a representative of SSJID here tonight. Are you still here, Mr. Rector? Well, I spoke with him earlier. I'm assuming you're talking about how long it would take to have a complete changeover?
Correct.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer for that.
I'm just wondering how many years of camping out at home we have to prepare for.
So I do know one thing, that even independent power districts have transmission lines that come from or through PG&E. So you might think like, oh, well, we're independent. And I don't know the specifics of what may or may not happen through SSJID, but the reality is a huge, the network and transmission lines are very much interconnected. Oh, here we go.
My name is Peter Riekirk. I'm the general manager at South San Joaquin Irrigation District. Just to answer your question, we've been in a long 15-year plus effort to try to take over the local utility system here from PG&E. That plan right now, because we're in continuing litigation, is kind of a rolling 5-year schedule once we can get the litigation to break through. But to Supervisor Patty's point, our plan does rely on the existing PG&E system in order for transmission to bring power to local areas. So it would not immediately prevent us from the potential for public power safety shutoffs that we're seeing today. Had we been able to work through that, had the state had a process that allowed for local agencies, local cities to take over the responsibility of providing their own power, then we would have likely looked at a separate transmission line to this area so that we could consider long-term savings from transmission charges. And it would have provided the secondary reliability and more importantly, the reliability that we're needing now during this current time. But that project is still ongoing. We're still very active at the CPUC. The city's also submitted a letter to the governor recently supporting the project, and we're hopeful that the governor and his new appointment at the CPUC and that our other local representatives will work on our behalf to help bring that project to fruition. Thank you.
Is that the same as MID, sir?
It would be the same model, yes. Not the same utility, but the same type of service, where you have the same thing as Turlock Irrigation District.
Also, just to share with you, you heard PG&E, a lot of preemptive, a lot of actions they're taking with new poles and such. I asked them, we got substations. The transmission lines go through here. Why are we shutting down, through us, and why not from the substation on? And he said the system is not as sophisticated as it needs to be in order for that to happen. But in the next 2 to 3 years, that will happen. That upgrade will be there. So it's coming, but it's not there. So in 2 or 3 years from now, we'll get a much more sophisticated system and controls of the power flow. So, you have a question? Yes?
Yes. So are we gonna have to look forward to the same situation next summer?
You've got
summer
you've
and fall?
got 2 or 3 years where this is gonna be.
This going on.
Yes. The
Amen.
potential. Yep. This is all about being prepared of what could be possible over the next several years. I'm not giving you a PG&E, firm
Yes.
date on anything,
Yes.
but this has been talking with Dylan offline. The system is being upgraded, and 15 years from now, they will have changed their entire power grid system. You've got wires that are going to have further spaces, so there isn't lashings. You're going to have insulation. You're going to have a lot. I'm just letting you know, it's going to be a new point. 15 years ago, 10, 15 years, the whole system is going to be innovative. So I know it's not comforting right now, but so you want to be prepared one way or another. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things we're focusing on is that we've got PG&E here that we're talking about, right? And the power is going off because of a choice that they make for whatever reason. But behind them are the guys that respond, whether it's a flood or a fire or a car accident or whatever. And I'm thinking there's gotta be some propeller heads figuring out an evacuation plan just in case the levee breaks. Because I look around and I say, what's most likely gonna happen around us? And what do we hear about the infrastructure of the levees and earthquakes and stuff like that? It's wow, it's gonna rain. And when it's gonna rain, that's when it comes up. And I'm just wondering, we've got different evacuation needs. For fire, you would evacuate one way. For a levee break, you would evacuate for a different way. And I'm wondering if there's any coordination to say, yeah, we've got this nailed down as an evacuation route, and this is the route that will be open for ambulances to get to the hospital, and stuff like that.
SJ Ready, just leave it, will tell you, if you go to SJ Ready, there's going to be all of the possible emergencies that we could have in our region. They're working very diligently in having that online and available, and you could be well informed for floods, for fires, for whatever could be happening our way. Okay, SJ Ready. That's the next couple of weeks.
Evacuation routes have already been determined and they're available on the webpage as well.
Yep, evacuation rates have already been determined. They're online.
So we do flood disaster drills yearly. We've had several real ones. We have evacuation routes. We have the city cordoned off. We've evacuated large sections of the city within the last several years. So that is actually something we are prepared for.
I was just going to say, thanks for those that are still here. We appreciate everybody coming out and being available, and hopefully this has been informative and a moment of preparation will go a very long way. So thank you all for participating.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for